Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordi and Glory video. In today's episode, we shall be doing another Tales of a Tournament Gamer, where I regale you with the story of some of the crazy things and people that I have encountered whilst playing competitive 40k. Last time I told you about Bill the Bastard, the Tau player who threatened me with a crossbow over a game of Warhammer 40k. If that sounds insane, it absolutely was, and I'll make sure to link that video at the end of this one so you can check it out for your own viewing pleasure. And as so many of you enjoyed the last one, I thought I would continue the trend and tell you another story about how a different Tau player got very upset over a game of 40k and tried to physically fight me over the gaming table. I don't know what he was thinking. Tau players aren't meant to be very good at melee. I assume he thought he'd be better at it IRL than he is on the tabletop. But regardless, get your favorite beverage ready, sit back and relax, get your paintbrushes together if you're listening to this whilst doing some hobbying, and let me regale you with the tale of Fighty Kyle. Our story begins back in early 8th edition. Now, for those of you that didn't play during this time, early 8th was great. The game had finally come out the dark days of 6th and 7th, and everything was feeling fresh and new and exciting because 8th was such a hard reset and a complete overhaul of the entire game. As a result, loads of people were getting into the game, either as a new player or coming back after a long hiatus. And because there were so many people getting involved, there were tournaments everywhere, left, right, and center. You could go to tournaments at the weekend. You could even go to some events that were being held midweek. There were almost not enough events for all the people that wanted to go and play some social 40k games. During this time, I was running my Imperial Guard pretty consistently at events. I hadn't yet branched out into things like my Steel Legion, which I told you about in the last story, or my Black Templars. I was really just focused on my Mordian Iron Guard. Now, at first, when I've been going to these 8th edition events, I've been taking basically hybrid guard and just trying out loads of different units, finally putting models onto the tabletop that had been shelved for almost 2 editions because they've been unusably bad. So Lehman Russes were coming out, Chimeras, Hellhounds, Basilisks, you name it, I was running it. But after a while, I heard that sweet siren song and I couldn't resist it any longer. And I started going back to my beginnings, going back to my roots, and running my Pure Infantry Guard once again. But it's important to understand that Pure Infantry Guard back in 8th was a very different beast to how we know it today. There was none of these unique data sheets for Cadians and Catachans and Krieg and all that kind of stuff. We had precisely 2 troop choices. You could take infantry squads with a special weapon and a heavy weapon, or you could take conscripts. And conscripts were my bag, baby. I love those little buggers because they allowed you to get so many cheap bodies on the tabletop. Their stats were complete garbage. They came with ballistic skill 5+, weapon skill 5+, and I think they only had a leadership value of 4. They couldn't take any special or any heavy weapons, and the only thing they came equipped with was a las gun, bayonet, and frag grenades. However, there were 3 things that made them awesome. The first one was you could take 20 to 50 of them in a single squad. That's right, 50. You could take so many of them in a single squad, just a giant ball of cannon fodder. And you would typically take them in these huge blocks of 40 to 50 guys, because the second amazing thing about conscripts was they were only 3 points a model. That's right, for the low price of 150 points, you could take a maxed out 50-man conscript squad. Oh, you thought Cadian shock troops in 9th were a good deal? 2 squads of them for 130 points? Yeah. How about for 20 points more, you could more than double the amount of models you were taking, and it took up a single troop slot. And the third great thing about conscripts was how well they paired with commissars. Because in 8th edition, the summary execution ability meant that you executed one guy, and then the rest of the squad is considered to have passed. And you could do this to each squad that was within 6 inches of the commissar, which meant if you had 2 or 3 squads of conscripts, all conga line back, all bubble wrapping around a commissar, they were all essentially immune to morale. And this entire package, these like 150 guys and a commissar, would only set you back about 500 points. Naturally, being an infantry commander, conscripts were a dream come true, and I used to take a fair few of them in my army. I never fully abused it, but if I was running an army of about 250 infantry, which was my go-to number back then, I would typically have about half of those being conscripts, with 3 or 4 of these 30 to 40 man blocks, and then the rest of the list would consist of normal infantry squads with heavy bolters or las cannons and plasma guns or melter guns, and then supporting that I'd have another third tier of infantry, my elites, where I would take 3 squads of veteran guardsmen. You can't get veterans anymore, but they were essentially a guardsman squad that you paid a point extra per man, and you got ballistic skill 3+ on them rather than ballistic skill 4+. It was kind of like something between scions and guardsmen. The other thing about veterans is you could stack them up with loads of special weapons. So I used to take 3 of these things, and they would have 3 plasma guns in each squad and a plasma pistol and a power sword on the sergeant. And I'd also have a las cannon in there as well. Just really making sure that I'm taking maximum advantage of their extra ballistic skill and their extra special weapon capacity. This combination of infantry made the force both incredibly fluffy with the ability to throw waves after waves after waves of men at the enemy, but also gave it a bit of a sting in its tail because you did have quite a lot of heavy and special weapons in there, and many of them were rocking a pretty good ballistic skill as well. And it was this style of play and this kind of list that I was most comfortable with and most familiar with. I'd played this at the start of 5th edition, 6th edition, and 7th edition, and I'd really honed and perfected it over all of those years. And despite the fact that the army was so large and cumbersome on paper, and it looks like it would take a long time to play, I was so well practiced with it that I was really fast at using it on the tabletop. But what does this all have to do with the tale? Well, patience, my young Padawan. All will become clear in the fullness of time. Let us now move on to the first time that I encountered Fighty Kyle. Now, Kyle was one of those players who was getting into 40k properly for the first time with 8th edition, and he had come in it to win it. Now, Kyle was one of those players who was getting into 40k properly for the first time with 8th edition, and it was clear that he was here to win it. He was very much a competitive player, and it was obvious that he had done his homework when I saw his list. He had some of the best Tau units that you could get at the time. He had his minimum troop tax, and then he had lots of battlesuit commanders who could go flying around shooting things with lots of melter guns, and he also had a really strong core of riptides and hammerheads, both units which have always been traditionally very strong for the Tau. Unfortunately, by tailoring his list to take on the meta of the day, Kyle's list had a lot of quality firepower with those railheads and with the iron accelerator tides and with the fusion blasters, but it didn't have a huge quantity of firepower. So whilst on paper, Guard into Tau is a good game for the Tau, in our case, my list was not actually a great matchup for him at all. From my perspective, I thought this made the game much more fun because it meant we actually had a game rather than just a one-sided slaughter, which is often the case in competitive 40k. Unfortunately, Kyle didn't share the same attitude. As he was walking up to the table, I could see that he was pretty happy and excited for the game. Naturally, because the internet had told him that Tau into Guard was going to be a good matchup for him. But upon sighting my army, seeing all of the infantry laid out in their resplendent Mordian colours, his face immediately darkened. And things only got worse as I took him through my army list, explaining how many infantry I had and what the squads were made up of. And a few disparaging remarks were muttered under his breath. Things like, this is bullshit, this is ridiculous, you shouldn't be allowed to take that many models, so on and so forth. I truly believe he didn't think I could hear what he was saying. But I pretended like I hadn't heard anything he said, and I just let it go straight over my head. I mean, at the end of the day, it was the end of day number 1. It was game number 3. Perhaps the chap was just feeling a bit tired. But anyway, we start the game and we begin by deploying our models. Now, I take a very casual approach to what I'm doing. I've already got a couple of wins under my belt at this point. I'm really not that bothered what happens with game 3. It's just going to be a casual end of day for me. And so I'm like, you know what? Let's just deploy these in the quintessential Mimi pure infantry guard way. Just ranks of men, completely and utterly ranked up line by line, and just we're going to march across the battlefield in extended line, and we are going to drive the enemy from the field of battle with our bayonet, our lasguns, and our balls. And I'm there making sure that all my platoons are correctly grouped. So I've got, okay, this is Alpha Platoon, we've got the conscripts up the front, we're going to have a couple of infantry squads behind, we'll put the veterans, they can dig into this ruin here, we're going to have the company commander, he can stay with them, and the mortar team, we'll have the platoon commander and the command squad with the flag, they can go right slap bang in the middle of the platoon. Okay, that's Alpha Platoon. Okay, we've got a hill here and for Bravo Platoon, so we'll have lots of heavy weapon teams set up on there so they can have an overwatching position, and we'll have infantry down near the front. You guys get the idea. I'm not deploying with any tactical sense, I'm just deploying to make it look as cinematic as possible because I just wanted to have a bit of fun with it. On the other side of the table, things were much more serious. Kyle had to make sure that every single model was placed perfectly, each unit having the precise line of sight and angles of fire that he wanted. Much pre-measuring was done so that he knew exactly where each model in his army could move when it came to taking objectives and also getting into range with certain weapons. In fact, things were done so precisely and so intricately that my deployment was actually done before Kyle's, despite the fact that I probably outnumbered him 5 or 6 to 1. And this trend would continue throughout the game. Despite the fact that my force was so much bigger than his, my turns would take significantly and noticeably less time than Kyle's. My turns consist of me pushing guys forward in a straight line and then shooting whatever targets of opportunity are available. Kyle's turns consist of moving a unit a little bit and then really closely checking to see if it had line of sight, and then moving it a little bit more and then moving a little bit more until he had exactly the angle that he wanted, and then he would measure every time I move it. He would measure precisely if it was still in range, even if it was using a weapon like a rail cannon, which has got a 72-inch range that could cover the whole board. If he moved it half an inch, he would recheck to see if it was still in range. At first, I just thought he was being careful. At the end of the day, I have such a massive numerical superiority over him that if he overextends or overexposes himself, I'll be able to bring that advantage to the fore and possibly, crush a flank or gain a significant lead in a certain area of the battlefield. But after a couple of turns of this, I realized what's going on. You see, the mission we were playing was a custom one for the tournament. This is something that used to happen all the time back in 8th edition. We didn't have the set objectives and set missions and secondaries that you know and love today in 9th edition. A lot of the time, the core rulebook missions were really imbalanced and weren't very good. So you had a lot of tournament organizers, whether they were getting them from some online source or something, but were essentially using custom rules and custom mission packs. This particular mission that we were playing was really interesting because you got more points for holding the middle objectives the later the turn was. So for example, if you hold one objective in the middle of the board on turn 2, you get 2 points for that objective. But then if you hold that objective in the middle of the board on turn 3, you get 3 points. Turn 4, 4 points. Turn 5, 5 points, so on and so forth. And what I realized is that Kyle wanted the game to end early. He didn't want it going any later than turn 3 or turn 4. Because if the game went on longer, my superior numbers were going to tell. And despite the fact that I was only really marching forward about 6 inches a turn, in those later turns, that would be enough distance covered for me to get those middle objectives, and suddenly my points would start spiking through the roof. And so what I start doing is making sure we get through these battle rounds as quickly as possible. And my turns become lightning fast. I start doing things like, if I don't need to shoot a unit because it's like 3 guardsmen and its firepower basically means nothing, I'm just not going to bother. And I focus on just pushing those units forward that are going to make a difference. Those units that could potentially win me the game. This means that despite his best efforts, we start getting through the turns really quickly, because there's only so many times you can really measure and pre-measure before things start getting absolutely ridiculous. And once or twice, I do have to politely mention the fact that if the hammerhead was in range last turn and the units it's shooting at have only moved closer to it, it's probably in range again this turn. And the further we get into the game, the more visibly frustrated Kyle becomes, because he can see his early lead rapidly slipping away. And his mood only worsens when the TO comes over partway through turn 4 and says, you guys need to at least get to the end of turn 5 before the round finishes, or you're both going to receive penalty points. This was absolutely fine for me because I was not going to have a problem getting through turn 5. But for Kyle, suddenly it meant he was under more pressure. And it also meant that if the game had ended on turn 4, he was guaranteed to win. But turn 5 made it a totally different story. Turn 5 was the tipping point. Now, the Tau started off battle round 5 very strongly. They went first, and so they concentrated their fire on my left flank, and this managed to essentially completely clear my forces off there. Very smart move. It meant that thanks to a Coalstar commander that had zoomed over there, not only had they cleared that objective and made it harder for me to take it, but it also meant that they kind of secured it. In fact, I had no object nearby, and the only model that could get onto that objective was a single lone veteran with a plasma gun. However, in order to achieve this, because it was late in the game and many casualties had been taken on both sides, Kyle had been forced to expose one of his Fire Warrior squads that were holding an objective. They stuck their long barrel pulse rifles out of a ruined window, and this allowed them to draw a line of sight from those pulse rifles onto that left flank and support fire. And they did a pretty good volley, and they were a big reason why I ended up losing a few more infantry than I expected to. This put Kyle in a pretty strong position, and it was a very smart move, and he does deserve the credit for that. But it also meant that I had an opening, and upon sighting the opportunity, I seized it. The first thing I did was move my lone plasma gun guy out onto the objective that had the Coalstar commander. I then moved forward with one of my shattered conscript squads. There must have only been about 10 or 15 left in this unit from a full starting 50-man block. I then opened up in my shooting phase, and I began by taking what supporting fire I could and plastering it into the Coalstar commander. I was able to do a few wounds, and after the dust had settled, he was left alive on 4 wounds. It was then the time of the veteran plasma gunner. Now, the model for this, I remember it so distinctly, was one of my old school metal Steel Legion plasma gunners, one of the oldest models I've had in my collection. He overcharged his plasma gun. Now bear in mind, there was no reroll ones available. He didn't have take aim or anything like that. It was just down to him and his weapon. He got 2 hits. He then got 2 wounds. Kyle had to make 2 4+ saves from his shield generator, and he failed both. And he didn't have any command points left over, meaning that the plasma gunner just spat on the ground and went, "Do I do everything myself?" and just blew the Cold Star Commander away. I think at the time was a 15-point model, took out one that was over 100 points. It was pretty badass to say the least. Not only did this get me points because I now held the objective, but that Cold Star was also Kyle's Warlord, which gave me an extra point for Slay the Warlord, which is one of the secondaries you could get back in 8th edition. But despite this display of pure badassery, the Tau was still in the lead. I still needed to clear those Fire Warriors, and I didn't have any spare firepower to support them. It was going to purely come down to the plucky conscripts. They began by unleashing a volley of first rank fire, second rank fire into the town. And they actually did really well, scoring way more hits and wounds than they had any right to deserve, and butchering this 5-man Tau squad down to about 2. Sadly, that's not going to be enough, and Kyle gleefully announces to me, "Oh, well, good effort, mate, but I'm still going to hold that objective. You haven't done enough casualties for morale, so that means I'm going to win the game by a few points." And I had to go, "Hang on, mate. I still have a charge and fight phase." And you can see the panic start to set in. "Oh, yeah, but you're too far away for that. It's well over 12 inches. No, mate, I was in rapid fire range. I haven't measured it precisely, but I am at least within 12 inches. I can give it a go." We measure the distance, and it's 11 inches away. It's a long way. And Kyle's like, "Oh, well, you know, you're probably not going to make it then. Come on, what's the final score?" I'm like, "Hang on, mate. I'm going to give it a go. I mean, if I pull this off, it could be big, right? I don't know what the exact score is, but it could be big." And so I pick up my 2 dice, and I roll the dice. I get a 6, and another 6. Glory to the first man to die! Charge! And my conscripts with bayonets fixed go charging into that ruin. Now, it's still not a guaranteed thing because it's only going to be about 15 attacks, hitting on 5s, wounding on 4s. But again, the conscripts just go absolutely berserk, and they well overperformed in the shooting phase, and then they completely overperform in the combat phase as well. They get about 10 hits, about 7 wounds. The 2 Tau Fire Warriors just fail all I say. It's not even close, and they are completely torn limb from limb. And with my pile in and consolidate, I drive the Foul Xenos from the objective. I drive them from the field of battle. And the victory comes over to the Imperial Guard. And it is a victory by a single point. And Kyle gets a little bit upset. He starts ranting and raving. People start turning around and looking over at our game as he's audibly going, "This is stupid. That should never have happened. My Tau commander should be alive. Conscripts are broken. Someone needs to do something about them. They're so overpowered. This is so unfair. I should have won that game. Let's recheck the points." So on and so forth. You get the picture. And this tirade of just anger just comes out, and as he's packing all his models away, he doesn't even shake my hand to say good game, and he just storms out of the hall. And that was the first time that I encountered Fighty Kyle. Although at this point he was more very angry and particularly grumpy Kyle than Fighty. But wait, there's more, because that was all to change the second time that I faced him. 3 or 4 months pass, and my brother and I decide that it'd be really cool to go to a doubles tournament together. And the same TO that was hosting the last event is hosting a doubles one, and we've always enjoyed going to the Warlord Games tournament. So we're like, you know what? We are in. And we decide to go with a Guard and Blood Angels combo. And what we end up with is I take the pure infantry Guard, and my brother takes his pure mechanized Blood Angels. My infantry army is essentially half of what the 2,000 point list was. I've got 2 big squads of conscripts. I've then got 3 squads of normal infantry and 3 squads of these veterans, and various officers and commissars supporting them as well. My brother ended up going the total other way, and he brings pure tanks, and he's got 3 or 4 or 5 Blood Angel vehicles. It's at least 2 Razorbacks with twin assault cannon and 2 Bile Predators with twin assault cannon and double heavy bolter as well. And as fate would have it, we encounter Kyle on game 3 of day number 1 once again. Now, Kyle didn't have a partner for the event. He'd signed up as a single. And one of the members of the club that were hosting the event had said, you know what, I'll be your teammate. I wasn't going to go, but I'll be your teammate, so at least you've got someone to play with. His teammate was called Jez, and Jez is a good friend of mine, and he's an absolutely sound and solid character. And so I was actually really looking forward to the game because I get on with Jez really, really well, and so does my brother. Jez has been playing 40k since Rogue Trader, and he's actually played against some of the original designers of 40k. He's been to so many tournaments that he just doesn't really care anymore, and he's more there for the social than anything else. He wants to have a few beers, get a bit tipsy, roll a few dice, eat a gnarly kebab, go home, and have a fantastic time. As a result, he tends to run lists that are pretty low intensity, and in this case, his 1,000-point army essentially consisted of Magnus and a few 5-man squads of rubrics that he just sat on objectives the whole time and didn't really worry about using them all that much. Now, if you're hoping that some of the attitude rubbed off onto Fighty Kyle, I'm sorry to disappoint you, it did not. He turned up with what was very obviously quite an intricately planned 4D chess maneuver, smooth brain army list. I don't know exactly how it worked, but essentially the core of it was this big ball of fire warriors, these 3 maxed out squads of fire warriors, and they had a number of commanders in crisis suits and fireblades, and I think maybe Dark Strider was there, and they were all buffing and supporting these fire warriors to the point where they were getting maximum shots, crazy ranges, and they were basically able to walk across the battlefield and pepper anything with some pretty serious firepower. Supporting this Fire Warrior Death Ball were a couple of Hammerhead tanks, railguns, and smart missiles galore. And once again, we're essentially playing a custom mission. It was an adaptation of the Relic, and you had to hold the middle objective. And if you held it at the end of the game, you took home the gold. Once again, I won't give you the blow by blow, but I will tell you that Johnny and I had a plan. We were going to split our force into 3 distinct formations. His armor was going to overwatch the middle objective. Because of their relatively short range, they were going to struggle to get into any kind of like long range firefight, but they could happily sit in cover, getting a cover save, and overwatch the middle with all of those juicy twin assault cannons. I was then going to split my infantry down into 2 distinct platoons. The first one was going to be made up of the bulk of our infantry with the conscripts and commissars and maybe a squad of infantry to support them as well. The other platoon was going to be made up of the rest of the infantry squads and my 3 veterans. They were going to dig into a bunch of ruins on our left flank and hopefully do some kind of encircling maneuver where they could get round into those enemy vehicles, pop them off, and then destroy our enemy's fire support. During our opponent's deployment, Jez and most of their fire support went up against our veteran infantry, and then the Fire Warrior Death Ball with its supporting characters went in the center. Clearly, they were wanting to make a play for the objective with the majority of their objectives secured. And with everybody set up, the game begins. And oh my god, it's deja vu, guys. Kyle is measuring, remeasuring, pre-measuring, moving in tiny increments, measuring again. His first turn, despite the fact that he's only operating 1,000 points, takes an hour. Jez is done in about 5 minutes. In fact, Kyle is taking so long that Jez basically says to my brother, oh, I've just got a bunch of stuff facing off against you. Do you mind if we just rattle through our turns and we just let Kyle get on with it? So his own teammate in his turn 1 is already like trying to speed things up. But Kyle will not be rushed. He takes an hour on his first turn, and what I noticed straight away is he is focusing my forces down exclusively. Despite the fact that he has a couple of hammerheads with rail cannons that could happily pick off my brother's tanks, before they ever get near him, he still starts putting submunition rounds into my blocks of infantry. When it comes back around to our turn, we're just so happy that we finally get to move some models that we end up being pretty quick. And we're moving our guys around. And essentially what happens is my brother's not in range with a huge amount of his guns. So he fires off a few long range heavy bolters. I let him fire a few of my units because he knows what they do. He's played against Guard enough times that he knows exactly what they do. And between us, we end up playing through the army pretty quickly. But Kyle gets really, really picky. He's like, you can't be firing his units. They're his units. I wouldn't fire Jez's units. And I'm like, bro, they're my units. And I know what my brother knows what they are. So I'm just going to let him fire them. He's like, no, you can't do that. You need to make sure that you're only controlling your side of the army. And I said, dude, in the rules pack, it says that once both armies are on the tabletop, they're considered one force. So it's not a problem at all. Anyway, he gets the TO over. And the TO's like, look, if Tim wants to let his own brother shoot a couple of basic infantry squads which are armed with las guns, a plasma gun, and a heavy bolter, it's fine. Like, don't worry about it. It'll help speed the game up. What turn are you guys on? We're already just getting our turn 1. Right, you boys need to crack on. You're already like an hour and 20 minutes into this game. Some people are getting close to finishing theirs already. Come on, crack on. So the TO basically was like, look, it's fine. Carry on, just keep playing. This does not go over well with Kyle. Clearly, he thought that the TO was going to side with him. And as a result, he ends up getting very picky during the game. He makes sure that not only is he measuring everything precisely, but he's also insisting on us checking our ranges. To the point where I end up having a squad of infantry that are within 15 inches of one of his units, and he's like, I want you to measure range for that. And I'm like, dude, they're clearly within range. He went, no, I want you to measure range for it. I insist. I don't think you're in range. So I have to get my tape measure out and measure. I'm like, look, I'm within 15. It's like a 9-inch margin for error. Are you happy? And he's like, well, you're not in rapid fire range though, are you? And I said, no, I'm not in rapid fire range, mate. But I never said I was. I was only shooting like 1 plasma gun shot from each guy. He's like, well, yeah, you are in range, but you're not in rapid fire range. Yep, okay, cool, agreed. So we can start playing the game. And he's being really picky and really precise. And every single thing that we do, we're questioning. He's questioning, how many inches did that unit move? It moved 6 inches, mate. Are you sure? Measure it. Yeah, dude, it started here, and I've moved it forward 6 inches. How do you know it started there? Mate, it was on the edge of my deployment zone. So if I measure it, I've got a 24-inch range deployment zone, and then I've made it 30 inches on the tape measure. You can see I've actually only moved 5.5. I've got an extra half-inch movement. Move forward my guy a little bit more. And this trend just continues throughout the game. And my brother is a lot less patient than I am. And it gets to the end of their second shooting phase, and Kyle is remeasuring his hammerhead's range for about the 6th time in as many minutes, and my brother just makes an exasperated noise like, God, he said, dude, your hammerhead is obviously in range. It's got a 72-inch range battle cannon, and you're measuring stuff that's at the front of our army. It's obviously in range. Please, can you just fire your shot? And Kyle's like, well, no, I need to make sure. And it becomes obvious that what he's trying to do is once again make the game end early. Make the game end on turn 3. Because he's worked out that if he moves his fire warriors forward so many inches a turn, and with like advances and shoots with some shenanigans that he can do, he'll be able to get onto the middle objective at the beginning of turn 3. And he wouldn't have taken that much damage because Tau outranges him. And I'm running around with las guns, and the las guns that are directly opposite his fire warriors are my conscript ones. So I'm not going to be in rapid fire range of him, and even if I was, the amount of damage I'm going to do is relatively negligible. And I think the moment that really put the whole slow play into perspective was when his own teammate Jez gets quite annoyed with him and says, Kyle, can you please just hurry up? I'm getting bored just watching you do stuff. I've already done my bits for this turn in about 5 minutes. Can you please just go a little bit faster? But eventually we get to turn 3. After I've grown a full beard and I've started collecting my pension, we finally get to the midpoint of the game. And Kyle moves his death ball of fire warriors, who had only taken 1 or 2 casualties at this point, into the middle of the board, securing that objective with quite a solid block of infantry. And he continues to focus fire on me, and I'm pretty badly shredded at this point. Most of the veterans are gone. I think there's 1 squad that's left intact, just hiding in a ruin. Most of the regular infantry are gone, and a lot of my conscripts are looking pretty battered as well. But he's moved into the middle of the board. And because my brother's army hasn't been doing a huge amount for the first couple of turns, it's obviously not twigged with him how much damage these assault cannons can do. And as the Tau plant their flag in the middle, a distant whirring noise starts up. And then every last fire warrior gets turned into awful and pink mist. You see, up until this point, my brother had basically rolled a few dice for me and blinked off with a few heavy bolters. And what had clearly happened is he had basically saved up all his hot dice for this one moment. He sprung the perfect ambush. At least 8 assault cannons unloaded. I honestly don't remember if he missed or failed to wound with any shots. It was just insane. And once where there was a full contingent of proud Tau fire warriors with their supporting characters, after Johnny was done, all that remained was the twitching body parts of a bunch of Xenos scum. Naturally, Kyle wasn't very happy. And once again, he explodes in visible anger and starts going off on a tirade about this is bullshit, that's broken, assault cannons shouldn't be able to do that, I had all my buffs up, you got my characters well, that's so unfair, someone needs to nerf them, they need to do something about these things. But he's got a teammate with him. And Jed's like, alright mate, just like calm down, it's fine, like it's only a game. Obviously when someone tells you that, it makes it worse, so he gets even angrier. But then something twigs in his head and he realizes, now we've got infantry near the center of the board and he doesn't. And now we're going to be in a position to take the middle of the board and win the game. So suddenly the whole remeasuring and slow play, that goes out the window instantly. And it's all hands on deck and Kyle, the speed player, comes out to play. Now, all of a sudden, we've got to speed up. Come on, guys, we can't end this game turn 3. That'd be crazy. We need to get to turn 4, turn 5 at least. Because he's realized that he's going to need those turns to move his hammerheads forward to be able to sit them on the middle of the board. Because they're going to be much more resistant against the assault cannon fire. But we still have the rest of our turn 3 to do. Now, I had put Night Shroud on one of my big conscript blobs. And I'd moved it into the middle of the board in our turn 3. And I also had my veteran squad that I mentioned before. They jump out and they're able to degrade his hammerhead down to its final bracket. And I believe the other one had actually been destroyed at this point. I'd killed one earlier with a couple of veteran squads. And then this third veteran squad was degrading the last one. So it was only hitting me on 6s. It's at this point that the TO comes over and says, all right, guys, dice down. That's the end of the round. Work out who the victor is. And Kyle just loses it, starts going off on how unfair it is, how the game only ended on turn 3, how that totally favors us for some reason, this, that, and the other. And the TO goes, all right, mate, calm down. I'll tell you what. We've got a few minutes whilst we have to tidy the hall up and reset the terrain for day number 2. Why don't you guys play an extra 10 minutes and see if that makes a difference? Now, me and my brother are like, well, we don't really want to do that because we would have won the game at turn 3. But also, we don't want to overrule the TO. We don't want to start getting into it. And we're just really not that bothered. So we're like, sure, we'll play another round. Not a problem. We can get a turn in within 10 minutes. And so we play round 4. And what turn 4 basically comes down to is, can Kyle, with his Tau shooting, clear us out of the center? That's it. We don't actually have anything else we need to do in our turn 4. So really, it's just his round. And so he starts firing. Now, I've got a couple of squads of conscripts in the middle here. One of them is a larger squad, but hasn't really got any buffs on them. And the other squad is a smaller squad. It's only got about 5 models left in it, but it does have Night Shroud on it. Kyle starts off by putting most of his remaining good firepower into the big 20-man block. And he manages, even with a cheeky little bit of take aim, he manages to clear most of it away. But it does take him a bit more than expected because I did have that +1 save thanks to that stratagem. It's at this point that he loses a little bit of focus because he decides that he's going to drag it out again because he wants to get every minute of this bonus time. He doesn't want to give us the chance to pull something off that he wouldn't expect. He's already been caught out once by an ambush. He doesn't want us to do it again. So he starts slow playing it. He starts firing all these little bits of units, like the occasional drone here, like one Pathfinder there. And he's just putting all of this into a squad that doesn't even really matter, which is the veterans. They're nowhere near the objective. And he ends up killing about half of them. And then he fires his Tau Commander into them. And his Tau Commander goes into the veterans and manages to finish the rest of the squad off. And then he goes, oh, no. I meant to shoot those into the conscripts. The 4 or 5 conscripts that are in the middle of the board. I'm like, oh, sorry, mate. You've shot the veterans now. He's like, oh, yeah, but I didn't mean to do that. And I went, but you've done it. And you've wiped the 4 guys out, and we really don't have time to start like redoing things, dude. So, like, you're just gonna have to accept the fact that you've shot the veterans and you've killed them now. And he was like, oh, okay, well, don't worry about it. It's fine. You want to be like that. You want to be really precise and anal about things. Fine. I'm like, yeah, okay, dude, that's fine. I do want to be precise if you don't mind. And then he goes, I'm gonna take my hammerhead and fire it into your conscripts. I'm like, that's fine, you can do that. And he picks up his dice and he rolls them and he gets a whole bunch of 6s. And he's like, yes, I've hit you loads. I should easily be able to kill those like 3 conscripts in the middle. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, every single one of these shots miss. He's like, what do you mean they miss? I hit on 6s. You saw me get a bunch of 6s. I'm like, yeah, you've got a Blister Skill 6+ right now. He's like, yeah. It's like, well, unfortunately, I've got Night Shroud, which gives me a negative -1 hit modifier. So technically your 6s become 7s and you miss. Because this was back in the day when you didn't guarantee to hit on 6s. You could modify dice into negative numbers essentially. And he's like, he just goes absolutely insane. He's like, no, you should let me redo my command. Oh, how do you know Night Shroud's on the unit? You said Night Shroud's on the bigger unit. I go, no, bigger unit had Take Aim on it. That's why the Take Aim card was next to them. This is the smaller unit. That's why they've got the Night Shroud card next to them, because I put Night Shroud on them. He's like, oh, no, that card was on the unit. I went, no, that card is very clearly on that unit, dude. Anyway, he goes absolutely insane, calls the TO over, and the TO at this point is sick of his shit. And the TO literally just goes, Kyle, stop. You're already on extra time. I'm going to ask you one simple question. Was that Night Shroud card on the board where it is right now next to that unit of conscripts? And Kyle just stops dead in his tracks and goes, well, yeah. And the TO just shrugs his shoulders and looks at him and goes, well, then Night Shroud's on that unit and you can't hit him on 6s. End of discussion. Now work out who the final victor is. Needless to say, Kyle was a little bit upset. And he begins the all too familiar pattern and reaction now of just going off on one, ranting and raving, effing and blinding, and just saying all sorts of horrible things about, oh, you guys don't play fair, this is bullshit, this game's broken, and just it's genuinely quite, like, unpleasant. And I just go, mate, it's only a game. Look, let's shake hands, good game. And I put my hand out to him. And he just looks at me and goes, I'm not shaking your hand. And I, at this point, I'm not proud to say, lose my temper. And I just look this guy straight in the eye. And I say, you know what, mate? I've tried to be really patient with you the whole game. But you're just a massive dickhead. And I instantly regret saying it. It was just a momentary lapse of patience. But unfortunately, it's been said, and he goes bright red, and he throws his models that he had in his hands down on the table, and he starts squaring up to me. He's like, what the fuck did you say to me? What the fuck? You want some then? And like starts classic arms down by his side, chest puffed out, putting his face in my face. Obviously, straight away, the TO just puts his hands, gets in between us, puts his hands between us, like, right, you guys, separate out. Go, right, Tim, you go over there. Kyle, you go over there. Stay away from each other. Right, Johnny, you pack up Tim's models. Jez, you pack up fucking Kyle's models. And you guys are going to have to, one of you's going to have to leave first, and one of you's going to leave second. And the TO basically just like separates us and just diffuses the whole situation. My brother is pissing himself with laughter because he knows that I never, ever, ever, ever get into confrontations like that with anyone. And he can't, he's like, Tim, what the hell, man? I've never seen you lose your patience like that before. Even with me, when I'm your big brother and I'm doing sibling rivalry with you, I'm like, oh, Johnny, I just feel so bad, man. I can't believe I even said it. And he's like, nah, dude, like, I'm proud of you. Like, if you hadn't said something, I was going to. Anyway, the TO comes up to me and has a little word with me whilst my brother's packing my models away. And he makes sure that I'm all right, because he's seen the whole thing and he can see that I am a bit upset about the whole thing. I'm more fun laughing than anything else, but still, it's not a pleasant experience, someone getting that aggressive with you at a 40k game. But, you know, he makes sure they're all right, and then he gives me a very light reprimand and says, look, you shouldn't have said anything to him. You could clearly see he was getting angry. I apologize. I say, look, it won't happen again. Honestly, it's not what I come to 40k tournaments for. Fortunately, the TO knows me very well. I've been to dozens and dozens of his events and still go to all the events that he hosts. So it's not really a problem. I end up leaving, and I understand that later the TO has a word with Kyle, a strong word, and says, look, you can come back the next day, but you have to be absolutely on your best behavior because we've had a few complaints about you, mate. And if there's any other instances, that's it. You're gone from the events and from future events as well. Fair play to Kyle. He clearly either was embarrassed by the whole thing or took the warning seriously enough, because the next day he just makes a really strong effort like I do. We just avoid each other, and he ends up being on his best behavior for the rest of the event. And the funny thing is that the people that know me come up to me on the second day and make a few jokes about the whole thing and start teasing me and start calling me Tim the Cage Fighter. And they're like, when do we get to see the next fight? And all this kind of good stuff. It's all very good humored. And to be honest, I was grateful for it because it did just make light of the whole situation and essentially water under the bridge very quickly. And that, my little conscripts, is almost the end of our story. But there is one last little twist in the tale. A bit of a happy ending. Because Fighty Kyle has been on somewhat of a redemption arc. After taking a short time away from 40k, he came back at the end of 8th and going into 9th edition. And ever since he's come back, he has been a perfectly pleasant and normal person to play against. I've not played against him since, but I have seen him at many of the events that I go to, and there's absolutely zero ill will or tension between us. He has come up to me and chatted to me asking how my games have gone. Likewise, I've done the same to him. If he's had a new model that I've seen he's done a great job on painting, I've complimented him. Likewise, he's done the same to me. And I'm pretty confident now that enough time has passed. This was so many years ago that if we were to play again, I think it would be a totally different experience. And like I said, he really does seem to have made a strong effort to turn over a new leaf, improve his attitude, and just become a genuinely good member of the competitive community. So let's all say a big 07, a big salute down in the comment section for the redemption arc of Fighty Kyle. From toxic Tau player to leader in the Tau community. And that is finally the end of this episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you have, make sure you smash that like button. And if you want to hear more of these tournament tales, then please subscribe to never miss a video. If you found today's video particularly entertaining and you want to go the extra mile and support the channel, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. You can find links down in the description below. And before I go, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of my current Patreons and channel supporters. You guys are fantastic. You are the lifeblood of this channel. I truly would not be able to do it without you. So thank you one and all. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.